His grandfather sat in the same chair every day, staring out the window with vacant eyes. Alzheimer's had stolen his memories, his voice, even his smile. But when 16-year-old Jake was cleaning out the attic for his grandmother, he found a dusty box labeled Vietnam 1971, and inside were files that would change everything he thought he knew about the quiet old man who raised him. Welcome to Hidden Heroes. Before we begin this incredible journey of discovery, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. These are the heroes hiding in plain sight. Sunset Manor. Nursing home sat on the edge of Riverside, California, surrounded by palm trees that had seen better days. Every Sunday for the past 3 years, Jake Morrison walked through those automatic doors with the same heavy heart. Room 127, 3rd floor. The same route he'd taken since his grandfather had been diagnosed. Charles Morrison, or Charlie as the nurses called him, sat in his wheelchair by the window, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on something far beyond the parking lot. At 78, Alzheimer's had reduced him to a shell. He didn't recognize Jake anymore, didn't recognize anyone. "Hey, Grandpa," Jake said softly, pulling up the visitor's chair. He was 16 now, tall for his age, with his grandfather's same stubborn jawline. "Mom sent some cookies. Your favorite chocolate chip." No response, just that same distant stare. Jake opened the container and placed it on the small table beside the wheelchair. His grandfather had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when Jake was 8. For 6 years, Charlie had been his world, teaching him to fish, helping with homework, attending every baseball game. Now, the man who had been his hero couldn't even remember his name. "I got accepted to state," Jake continued, even though he knew the words wouldn't register. "Full scholarship. You always said education was the key to everything," a nurse peeked in. "He's been quiet today," she said gently. "Sometimes he hums old song, but not much else." Jake nodded. He'd heard this before. The nurses were kind, but they saw Charlie as just another patient. They didn't know about the man who had taught Jake to change a tire, who had stayed up all night when Jake had pneumonia, who had somehow managed to be both grandfather and father to a grieving boy. "I'll sit with him for a while," Jake said. The nurse smiled and left them alone. Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through social media, occasionally glancing at his grandfather. The old man's breathing was steady, his posture unchanging, trapped in a mind that no longer worked. After an hour, Jake stood to leave. He kissed his grandfather's forehead, something that always felt awkward but necessary. "I'll see you next week, Grandpa. I love you." The drive home was quiet. Jake's grandmother, Margaret, lived in the same house where his grandfather had raised him. It was a modest 2-story home in a neighborhood that had seen better days, but it was filled with memories. Pictures of Jake's baseball games lined the hallway. His grandfather's reading chair still sat in the living room, though no one had used it in 3 years. "How was he today?" Margaret asked when Jake walked in. She was 74, silver-haired, and had the kind of strength that comes from watching the man you love disappear, piece by piece. "Same," Jake said. "The nurses think he might be getting worse." Margaret nodded sadly. She visited Charlie every day. But the toll was showing. Dark circles under her eyes, a weariness that went bone deep. "We need to start going through his things," she said quietly. "The storage room, the attic. I can't do it alone." Jake understood. The house was full of a lifetime of memories, and most of them hurt too much for his grandmother to face alone. "I'll help," he said. "We can start this weekend." Saturday morning came gray and overcast. Jake found his grandmother in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold. "Ready?" he asked gently. She nodded, though her hands shook slightly as she set down the cup. "We'll start with the attic. Your grandfather, he kept everything up there. I haven't been up since before he got sick." The pull-down ladder creaked under Jake's weight as he climbed into the dusty space above the garage. Boxes lined the walls, labeled in his grandfather's careful handwriting: Christmas decorations, Jake's school papers, photo albums, a lifetime, organized into cardboard containers. Margaret followed slowly, using the flashlight on her phone to illuminate the cramped space. "Lord, there's so much," she whispered. They worked methodically, carrying boxes down to sort through in the living room. Old clothes that smelled of mothballs, books with yellowed pages, tools that Charlie would never use again. Each item felt like saying goodbye. All over again. It was Jake who found it, wedged behind a stack of paint cans in the far corner. A small wooden box, scratched and faded, with Vietnam 1971 written in black marker across the top. It was heavier than it looked, and something rattled inside when he moved it. "Grandma," Jake called. "What's this?" Margaret looked up from a box of old tax returns, and her face went pale. I don't know. Your grandfather never talked about Vietnam. He said it was best left buried." Jake carried the box downstairs and set it on the coffee table. The latch was old but functional. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were things that didn't make sense. Photographs, dozens of them. Black and white images of men in camouflage, standing beside helicopters, crouched in jungle clearings. And in the center of many of them was a younger version of his grandfather. But not the grandfather Jake knew. This man was lean, intense, holding weapons Jake had only seen in movies. "This can't be right," Margaret whispered, picking up one of the photos. "Charlie was a mechanic. He fixed cars. He never told me about any of this." But there was more. Documents with official seals, orders stamped classified. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped in oilcloth, was something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. A Navy SEAL trident pin. The gold gleamed even in the dim living room light, and attached to it was a small card with his grandfather's name. Petty Officer First Class Charles T. Morrison, SEAL Team 1. "Oh my God," Jake said quietly. "Grandma, look at this." Margaret took the pin with trembling fingers. "I don't understand. We were married in 1972. He came back from the war, and we got married 6 months later. He said he was a motor pool mechanic. He never... Why would he lie?" Jake was already digging deeper into the box. There were mission reports, commendations, and something that made his heart race. A purple heart. His grandfather had been wounded in action, and Jake had never known. One document caught his attention. It was a commendation letter dated March 15, 1971. Petty Officer Morrison demonstrated extraordinary courage during a rescue operation in the Mekong Delta. When his unit came under heavy fire while extracting a downed helicopter crew, Morrison voluntarily exposed himself to enemy positions to provide covering fire. His actions saved the lives of 7 American servicemen. Morrison was wounded twice during the engagement, but refused medical evacuation until all personnel were safely extracted. Jake read it twice, then handed it to his grandmother. Margaret's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the paper. 7 men, she whispered. "He saved 7 men and never told me, never told anyone." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the grandfather he knew with the man in those photographs. The Charlie Morrison who had taught him to ride a bike was the same man who had fought behind enemy lines in Vietnam. The gentle soul who had made pancakes every Saturday morning was also a Navy SEAL who had saved lives under fire. It changed everything. Every quiet moment, every time his grandfather had seemed distant or lost in thought, suddenly made sense. He hadn't been absent. He'd been remembering things too painful to share. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Jake practically ran through the doors of Sunset Manor, the wooden box tucked under his arm. He found his grandfather in the same position, staring out the same window, lost in the same fog that had claimed him. "Grandpa," Jake said, pulling up his chair closer than usual, "I found something." He opened the box carefully, taking out one of the photographs. It showed his grandfather with a group of men beside a river, all of them muddy and exhausted but smiling. Jake held it where his grandfather could see it. For a moment, nothing. The same vacant stare, the same empty expression. But then, something flickered in the old man's eyes. Just for a second, his gaze focused on the photograph. "Do you remember this?" Jake asked softly. "Do you remember Vietnam?" His grandfather's breathing changed slightly. His hands, which had been motionless for months, twitched almost imperceptibly. Jake tried another photo. This one showed his grandfather receiving a commendation from an officer in dress uniform. Again, that flicker of recognition, stronger this time. "You were a hero," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You saved 7 men. Why didn't you ever tell me?" And then it happened. His grandfather's head turned, slowly, painfully, but deliberately, until he was looking directly at Jake. For the first time in 3 years, there was awareness in those eyes, not full recognition, but something deeper, something that had never really been lost. "Jake?" The word was barely audible, cracked from disuse, but it was his name. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. "Yes, Grandpa. It's me. It's Jake." His grandfather's eyes moved to the photograph, then back to Jake's face. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, clearer than it had been in years. "That was a long time ago." Margaret arrived an hour later to find Jake sitting on the edge of his grandfather's bed, both of them looking at photographs spread across the hospital table. Charlie was more alert than he'd been since the diagnosis, though the effort was clearly exhausting him. "Charlie," Margaret's voice broke as she saw her husband's eyes focus on her face. "Maggie," he said softly. "I'm sorry I never told you." She moved to his other side, taking his hand. "Why, Charlie? Why keep it secret all these years?" Charlie's gaze drifted back to the photographs. When he spoke, his words came slowly, as if he was pulling them from some deep buried place. "We weren't supposed to be there," he said. "Cambodia, Laos, places that didn't exist on any map. When we came home, they told us to forget, to never speak of it, national security." He picked up the Purple Heart with fingers that shook from more than age. "The men I served with, some of them never made it home. The ones who did, we scattered. Different lives, different names sometimes. We learned to be invisible." Jake leaned forward. "But you saved those men. You were a hero." Charlie's eyes met his grandson's. For a moment, the fog lifted completely, and Jake saw the man his grandfather had once been. Strong, decisive, dangerous when necessary. "Heroes don't talk about it," Charlie said simply. "Heroes go home and become mechanics and grandfathers and try to forget the sound of helicopters in the night." Over the next hour, as if a dam had burst, pieces of the story came out. Charlie had been recruited for SEAL Team 1 straight out of basic training. His unit had conducted deep reconnaissance missions in areas where American forces officially didn't exist. They had rescued downed pilots, gathered intelligence, and when necessary, eliminated high-value targets. The rescue operation that earned him the Purple Heart had been their last mission. A helicopter carrying American advisors had been shot down near the Cambodian border. Charlie's team had gone in under cover of darkness, fought through enemy forces, and extracted 7 survivors. Charlie had been shot twice, once in the shoulder, once in the leg, but had refused evacuation until every man was out. "When I came home," Charlie said, his voice growing tired, "I just wanted to be normal. I wanted to fix cars and marry your grandmother and pretend that none of it had happened." Margaret was crying now, holding his hand tight. "I wish you had told me. I wish you had trusted me with it." Charlie squeezed her fingers with what strength he had left. "I was protecting you, all of you. Some secrets are too heavy to share." The effort of remembering, of speaking about things he'd kept buried for 50 years, exhausted Charlie completely. By evening, he had slipped back into the fog, though not as deeply as before. The doctors called it a lucid interval, not uncommon in Alzheimer's patients when triggered by powerful memories. But Jake knew it was more than that. His grandfather had fought one last battle against the disease trying to steal his mind. to make sure his grandson understood who he really was. Over the following weeks, Jake researched everything he could about SEAL Team 1 and the Vietnam War. He found references to operations that matched his grandfather's stories, though most of the details remained classified. He contacted veteran organizations and managed to track down 2 of his grandfather's surviving teammates. Both men remembered Charlie Morrison. Both spoke of him with the kind of respect reserved for legends. "Your grandfather saved my life," one of them told Jake over the phone. "Twice, actually. Once in Vietnam and once when I came home broken. He helped me get clean, get a job, get back on my feet. Never asked for anything in return." That was Charlie, always looking out for his brothers. Jake started visiting his grandfather more often, bringing the photographs and documents. Sometimes Charlie would recognize them, sometimes not. But there were moments, brief, precious moments, when the fog would clear and Jake would catch glimpses of the warrior his grandfather had been. One afternoon, as Jake was showing him a commendation letter, Charlie suddenly gripped his arm. "Promise me," the old man said, his voice urgent. "Promise me you'll remember them, the ones who didn't come home." "I promise, Grandpa." Charlie nodded, satisfied. "Good. That's what matters. Not the medals or the missions. Just remembering." Charles Morrison passed away 6 months later, on a quiet Tuesday morning while Jake was at school. Margaret called to tell him, her voice steady despite her tears. "He went peacefully," she said. The nurse said he was smiling. The funeral was small. Family, a few neighbors, some of Margaret's friends from church. Jake had wanted to contact his grandfather's old teammates, but he didn't know how. Charlie had taken most of his secrets with him. But as they stood graveside, something unexpected happened. 3 older men in worn suits approached Margaret, each carrying a single white rose. "Mrs. Morrison," one of them said, "we served with Charlie in Vietnam. We wanted to pay our respects." They had found out through veteran networks, through whispered conversations in VFW halls and online forums. The death of a SEAL always traveled fast among those who understood what it meant. At the graveside, one of the men stepped forward. He was tall, gray-haired, with the same kind of quiet intensity Jake remembered seeing in his grandfather's eyes during those lucid moments. "Charlie Morrison was the finest man I ever served with," he said simply. "He saved my life, and the lives of countless others. He came home and lived quietly, but he never stopped being a warrior. He just fought different battles, raising his grandson, caring for his family, being the kind of man who made the world a little bit better just by being in it." He placed his rose on the casket. "Hoo-yah, Charlie. Until Valhalla." The other 2 men followed suit, each offering their own brief tribute. Jake watched through tears, finally understanding something his grandfather had tried to tell him. Heroes come in many forms, and the greatest ones often go unrecognized. A year later, Jake started college at San Diego State. He chose to study history, specializing in military affairs. In his dorm room, he kept a framed photograph of his grandfather's SEAL team, along with the Purple Heart and the Trident pin. His roommate asked about them once. "My grandfather," Jake said simply. "He was a Navy SEAL." "Cool," his roommate replied, not really understanding. But Jake understood now. Heroes don't need recognition. They don't need monuments or parades. Sometimes they just need to be remembered by the people they loved and who loved them in return. Charlie Morrison had spent 50 years as a hidden hero, first in the jungles of Vietnam, then in the quiet suburbs of California. He had saved lives in war and peace, asked for nothing in return, and carried his secrets with the same quiet dignity he had brought to everything else in his life. In his final months, Alzheimer's had tried to steal those memories, to erase the man he had been. But love had proved stronger than disease, and the bond between grandfather and grandson had broken through the fog long enough for the truth to be passed down. Some heroes wear uniforms, some carry guns, some receive medals and recognition, and some sit quietly in nursing homes, their greatest battles fought in silence, their deepest victories known only to God and the families they protected by keeping their secrets safe. Jake visits a different nursing home now, volunteering with elderly veterans. He listens to their stories, helps them write letters, and makes sure they're not forgotten. It's what his grandfather would have wanted, the cycle continuing, one quiet act of service at a time. Because that's what heroes do. They serve, they sacrifice, they save lives. And sometimes, if we're lucky, they raise grandsons who understand that the most powerful stories are often the ones that are never told. Welcome to Hidden Heroes. If this story moved you, please share it. Subscribe to our channel, and remember, the greatest heroes might be sitting right next to you, carrying their own secret battles, their own quiet victories. You just have to know how to look.